How do we live with our deepest differences? This is a question posed by my esteemed colleague, Os Guinness. And I'm going to be drawing fairly extensively from Os Guinness today. And you may have noticed that this is a quick session, so I'm going to be going at what will appear to be a breakneck speed. Not to worry, in breakout sessions, you can ask me questions, and we can go into these subjects a little bit deeper. There are a lot of controversial issues sweeping through the United States right now. Have you noticed that? One word, I think, that could really summarize the way we feel, especially on university campuses, is tension. Things are very tense. I was reading an article not long ago in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and the title of the article pretty much sums it up. The article was called "Watch What You Say." Watch what you say. Many of us have very strong opinions on a number of different issues that are sweeping through the country, but some of us are afraid to voice those opinions. We're afraid we're going to be seen as judgmental. We're afraid that there are going to be even more serious repercussions. After all, we live in a world where somebody can instantly record what you've said, upload it, and show it to the world. Increasingly, everything you say is being heard by the world. And there are serious consequences associated with that. So my real subject this morning is, how can we disagree and stay friends? How can we talk about some of these crucial issues? And by the way, let's just start naming some elephants in the room. What are the issues? Issues like gay marriage, issues like abortion, transgender and sexual identity issues, the question of whether Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Now, these are massive issues, and there are people with strong opinions on all sides. Are these the kinds of questions that you bring up at Thanksgiving around the dinner table? Are these the kinds of questions that you bring up at parties? No, usually not, because they tend to lead to tension. But we have to be able to talk about them because they're important. So the first two things that I want to persuade you of this morning are that civil disagreement is both possible and desirable. Civil disagreement is possible. It is possible for us to have conversations about these issues and still walk away as friends. It's possible to talk about these controversial issues and not make enemies, and do so in a respectful and civil manner. And it's a good thing. Disagreement is a good thing. It challenges your own assumptions. It helps you to challenge the assumptions of others. It forces you to think a little bit more deeply about what you believe, and that's not a bad thing. We shouldn't be threatened by that. And so as I speak this morning, I want to give you what I hope is a helpful framework for navigating some of these issues. I want to talk to you about a few definitions. This is usually the boring part of the talk. Definitions can be a little bit boring and dry, but I think this will be helpful. I want to give you a definition for the word culture, for the word tolerance and intolerance. Those are loaded words. And finally, diversity. Also a loaded word, is it not? So culture. What do I mean by culture? I'm going to use the word a lot. Os Guinness, and if you've never heard Os Guinness speak, by the way, he sounds like Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm tempted to take him a whole lot more seriously on that basis. He says, culture is a way of life lived in common. Run, Luke, run. No, he doesn't say that. Culture is a way of life lived in common. What does that mean? Look at the cultural landscape around you and ask yourself some very basic questions. What are some of the central preoccupations of the culture in which you find yourself? What are some of the things that your culture is afraid of? Here's a scary question. What are some of the things that your culture celebrates? What do we single out for praise and attention? I think we can point to diversity here and say that our culture really values diversity. We pride ourselves on being a melting pot in the United States. We have many different faiths and many different traditions coming together. We really cherish diversity in the United States right now. Now, this is a good thing. Here's another odd one. Why won't zombies go away? Why won't zombies go away? I have gotten invitations to speak to younger audiences, and they have actually said, "Do you have any apologetic talks on zombies?" No, but I suppose I'll head to the study and work on this. But I got interested in zombies because everybody else is interested in zombies. Why won't these gnarly intruders go away? They're everywhere. They've infiltrated every facet of culture. There's Warm Bodies, which is a Shakespearean adaptation of zombies. And now there's Pride and Prejudice, and zombies. Isn't that great? Finally, I can get behind some Jane Austen. Why won't they go away? There's something about the zombie that is compelling to us, something that we relate to. And then I began to think about what a zombie is. A zombie is a slave in its own flesh. A zombie is a slave to its own appetites and desires. In fact, a zombie, you might say, is a very vivid picture of mindless consumption and a total lack of self-control. Now, I'm beginning to see a few parallels here in our culture where addiction runs rampant, where mindless consumerism is often championed, and people eat, take, fill themselves, and still feel so empty. Zombies aren't going away because they speak to part of our common experience. Culture is a way of life lived in common. So what do we mean by tolerance and intolerance? I think the actual definitions of tolerance and intolerance are fairly self-explanatory. But our cultural definitions of tolerance and intolerance are very specific and highly idiosyncratic. Here's what I mean. By tolerance, the word tolerance, in fact, is too tame of a word, I think, for our cultural understanding of this word. What we actually mean by tolerance is to champion, to celebrate, and to endorse. To champion, to celebrate, and to endorse, and to sign off. That is, in fact, usually what is meant by tolerance. And intolerance amounts to doing anything less than celebrating, championing, and signing off what has passed through. We saw this when the decision regarding gay marriage was passed down. There was large celebration. I remember I was in downtown Atlanta on that day, and every television was televising this. People were cheering. Emails were being sent around offices. But if you weren't cheering, you conspicuously stood out. Now that's very interesting. So intolerance amounts to a lack of enthusiasm often. And tolerance is to celebrate, to champion, and to push forward, oftentimes, an idea that is held very close by our cultural elites. Which brings us to the word diversity, another controversial word. What do we mean by diversity? Ironically, I think oftentimes when we come to the question of diversity, in our great effort to celebrate all sorts of different traditions and different outlooks and ways of life, we end up erasing the real distinctions. There was recently a prominent Christian writer who put this message on Twitter. I'm going to leave this person unnamed, but here's what she said. As we start a family, she's expecting a child. As we start a family, I've never been more happy and grateful to be in a true partnership with my husband. And then in parentheses, no strict gender roles / hierarchy. Now, there are a number of assumptions in that simple tweet. Here's the thing. I will wholeheartedly agree that men and women are equal in value. Men and women, I will tell you this as a Christian, I believe both men and women are made in the image of God and are intrinsically valuable. It's one thing to say that men and women are equal. It is another thing entirely to say that there is no difference between a man and a woman, which I would say is false. After all, she's the one carrying the baby, not him. There are differences, and the differences matter. The question of whether Muslims and Christians worship the same God comes to the fore here as well. It's a very complex question, and there are subtleties involved here. But oftentimes, and I think the intentions behind this, by the way, are good. I think people are doing this because they think it's right, and they think that this is the best way to promote equality. But in order to make that statement true, if you want to say that there is no difference between the God Muslims worship and Christians, you have to begin erasing some of the key distinctions. You have to take away core doctrine. Christians believe in a God who is triune. Muslims believe Allah is one. Now, this is a key difference, and I would argue that if in the name of diversity you want to erase these distinctions, you're actually dishonoring both Muslims and Christians. It amounts to saying, look, I know what you believe, but unfortunately it's not very compatible with public perception and marketing, and so we're going to just fix this up for you a little bit and take away some of your core doctrine in order to make this more palatable to the public. It honors neither Christians nor Muslims. So oftentimes what we see with diversity is we see men and women who want to promote equality but actually end up erasing real differences or de-emphasizing the differences in the name of equality. And what you get is homogeneity. And the differences are effectively erased. I think, as well-intentioned as this is, that it is misguided. I think we have to pay attention to the differences because the differences matter. I don't think we can take these conversations seriously if we can't talk about the real, genuine differences. And differences do present challenges. This is why Dr. Guinness is right, that the great challenge of living in a culture where there are as many faiths and traditions represented and no faiths represented is how do we live with our deep differences? A lot of these beliefs aren't just different, they're conflicting. There is tension there. But we have to be able to talk about these differences in a civil manner, and we have to be able to move past pretending that they don't exist. They do. We owe it to ourselves to be honest. So much for the definitions. Now what I want to do, and again I apologize because I'm moving very fast, I want to offer you a framework for having these conversations. And once again, I've raised a number of different issues here, and so I am fair game in the breakout sessions. You can ask me questions, and also we have a Q&A panel at the very end, and we look forward to hearing your questions as well. But inside everybody's mind, I want to give you a gradient scale for thinking that I think will help us understand why so often these conversations become so charged and so volatile. Inside everybody's mind, 4 things are taking place, and they go from weakest all the way to the strongest and most deeply held. Opinions, knowledge, beliefs, and then finally what I will call core convictions. Opinions, knowledge, beliefs, core convictions. Opinions are fairly self-explanatory. I like strawberry ice cream, you like vanilla, you like football, I like soccer. Our opinions matter to us, but we're probably not going to die for our opinions. I don't believe there were too many martyrs for the color red or green. Your knowledge is important, but again, you're probably not going to die for the fact that you were born on a certain date. You're not going to die for the fact that you know which car is yours or if you know the height of the Empire State Building. These are the facts that you're surrounded by. And the facts of your life matter to you, but again, they're not deeply entrenched in your heart. But then when we come to beliefs, we go a step deeper, because your beliefs flow directly from your experiences and from your life. This is in large part where your beliefs come from. And we know that there are false beliefs. All of us who believed in Santa Claus know that that's the case. But we know that all beliefs contain usually an element of truth in them because they flow from your experiences. And so beliefs are a little bit more important to you. You care more deeply about your beliefs. Now, I want to illustrate the difference between the facts of your life, knowledge, and beliefs real quickly by pulling in C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis asks us to imagine a doctor, and a corpse is wheeled in before the doctor, and he looks at the corpse and he says, well, judging by the man's skin tone and some other salient factors, I believe that this person was poisoned. I believe he was poisoned. Now, notice that his belief is not blind. He's drawing on his experience as a physician. He's drawing on the relevant facts that he's presented with, but he doesn't know yet. And then Lewis tells us the doctor performs an autopsy on the man and locates the toxin. And then he says, all right, I can confirm this man was poisoned. Now, at that point, C.S. Lewis says he ceases to believe the man was poisoned because he knows conclusively that he was poisoned. So there's the difference between knowledge and beliefs. Beliefs contain an element of faith. It's not blind faith, but there is trust and knowledge that come together in your beliefs. And they're more personally cherished because they flow from your experiences and from your life. But finally, we come to the most important of all, core convictions. And your core convictions are intimately tied up with your identity. Your core convictions, these are the things that you will possibly die for. These are the things that matter so deeply to you. Your core convictions, they're intimately tied up with who you are. Now, here's the point. Most of the major issues that I've named, and many that I haven't named, but most of the major issues dividing this nation right now are core conviction issues. These are issues that go right to the heart of who a person is and what they most deeply cherish. So, that should give us a very interesting perspective. And the perspective is, if you challenge a person's core conviction, if you challenge that assumption, if you ask them to reconsider, you are not simply asking them to change their mind. You're not just asking them to entertain a different idea. You're asking them to consider changing who they are. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I think we should. I think we have to have these conversations because truth is at the heart of it. But I think we need to also take into consideration the nature of the request. It's so important to understand why people get so worked up, why people feel personally attacked in disagreements. Because if it's a core conviction issue, this goes to the heart of who they consider themselves to be. So we have to make truth primary, and if we're going to make truth primary, we need to be committed to having these difficult conversations. I want to end on this note, and I'm going very fast here, but we have breakout sessions, we have a Q&A following. The Lord impressed upon my heart a story that at first I thought, I don't see how this relates. I don't really want to pull this in. I'm a little hesitant, but I decided, well, Lord, it's in my best interest to obey you. So I decided I would obey the Lord. He kept bringing to mind the story of the prophet Nathan, who goes to King David. You see, Nathan has to go to King David and has to indict King David of adultery and of murder. You know, the job description of a prophet is not an especially perky one, is it? You have to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That's the cozy way of saying it. But in essence, what they have to do is they have to go to the most powerful people and tell them, you're under God's judgment. Don't shoot the messenger. But they often did shoot the messenger, didn't they? And Nathan's marching orders are to go to King David, the most powerful man in all of Israel, and convict him of immorality and tell him, you're under God's judgment. Now, it's true, David is called a man after God's own heart. But at this point in the story, it doesn't look like that, does it? David looks like a ruthless king who is willing to do whatever he wants to get what he wants. After all, not only has he slept with another man's wife, when the man wouldn't cooperate with his little scheme to avoid scandal, he sent Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, out to the front lines and had him killed. Now here's why I bring this in. Many of us, on all sides of these issues, feel oftentimes like we're outnumbered and outgunned. We feel like we're in the position of speaking to people who hold tremendous power and wield tremendous influence. How on earth are we going to get through to these people? How on earth can we disagree with these people when they hold such power? I think many of us are in the position of prophets. So listen to this narrative. Some of you will remember this story, it'll be familiar to you. For others, this will be new. But in 2 Samuel chapter 12, it says, "And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, there were two men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his morsel and drink from his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. Nathan said to David, thou art the man. You are the man. You see what he does there? He tells the story of what David has done. He tells the story of King David's injustice under disguise. He tells him a parable. And David instantly recognizes the injustice. In fact, the great irony here is that King David's response is a righteous response. He pounces immediately on the moral offender. And it's just at that point when the prophet pulls the rug out from under his feet and says, thou art the man. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude on this note. I think that what we need to do is tell the stories of what we believe under disguise, to bring to light to men and women what we believe is deeply wrong with our culture and with our society. Tell it under disguise. I want to give you one quick example and then I'm through. The power of this is that we are appealing to people's conscience. And we're also giving them the benefit of the doubt because we are assuming that they have a healthy and functioning conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, here's an assumption that I believe is absolutely vital. People are committed to their positions on these deeply moral issues because they believe it's the right thing. People don't commit to something deeply unless they think it's the right thing. We need to bear that in mind. People believe that they are doing what is moral, what is just. They believe that they are doing something that makes the world a better place. I understand that Rosaria Butterfield was here last year. In her autobiography, she talks about the fact that all of the positions that she embraced before she was a Christian, she was committed to them because she believed she was making the world a better place. I don't know about you, but I'm a little slow on the uptake, and that came as a revelation to me. Wow, she's not just, I was just previously thinking of her as being just immoral or different or wrong. No, she believed she was doing the right thing. I was in profound disagreement with all of the positions that she embraced, but I realized she did what she did because she believed it was making the world a better place. Let me give you an example real quickly of telling it under disguise. This is a modern parable, and then I'll close. This is from an article in the National Review. Listen to this. Think of this as a modern-day parable. If you were in charge of a nature preserve and you noticed that the pregnant female mammals were trying to miscarry their pregnancies, eating poisonous plants, or injuring themselves, what would you do? Would you think of it as a battle between the pregnant female and her unborn and find ways to help those pregnant animals miscarry? No, of course not. You would immediately think something is creating intolerable stress. So much so that animals would rather destroy their own offspring than bring them into the world. You would strive to identify and correct whatever factors were causing this stress in the animals. This is a lady named Frederica Matthews Green writing in National Review about the issue of abortion. And she's telling it under disguise to bring to our attention a different angle, to show us in a different light this practice. And by the way, she was formerly a deeply committed pro-choice advocate. But over the years, after what she's seen in her own experiences, she changed her mind. But notice her tactics there. It's a prophetic voice that she's assuming, and she's telling it under disguise, and she's giving her audience the benefit of the doubt. She's believing in us that we have a conscience and that we can identify and be discerning when it comes to this story. It doesn't mean she'll instantly change everybody's mind, doesn't mean you'll instantly change everybody's mind, but I do think it provides a creative way to move forward in these difficult conversations, especially when we're speaking to people who hold real power and real